City Chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America coming up here. And again, 7 p.m., reminder, go out to your windows, go towards those windows, open up the windows and clap for all of the essential workers out there who are maintaining some type of normalcy during this age of social distancing. This is WBAI New York, 99.5 FM and WBAI.org online. Stay tuned for Revolutions Per Minute coming up.
Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Tuesday at 5. RPM is about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Every week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in NYC. Join the movement at socialists.nyc.
Yo, what's good, New York? This is Jack Devine, he, him pronouns, and you are listening to Revolutions Per Minute, live from the new WBAI studios and live from my apartment. We're a socialist radio show and podcast for members of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. The DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with 56,000 members nationwide, and NYC DSA is its biggest chapter. We are run by our 5,500 plus members and organizers who are working together to build democratic socialism in all 5 boroughs. What is to be done? That is the question that should be on any socialist organizer's mind, as the Bernie campaign has been defeated. At the same moment, a new crisis of capitalist production has arisen. Today, we check in with a number of organizers on how we should move forward to build working class power in this new era of struggle. They'll share with you the projects they're involved in, from worker organizing to mutual aid to political education efforts. Now I hand it off to Lee Zishi, who is co-hosting with me today.
Hey everyone, this is Lee Zishi. I use she, her pronouns. This is the first time I am co-hosting from my apartment in Bed-Stuy, so welcome from Bed-Stuy. Today we will not be having any of our headlines, but later in the show we will be hearing from Simone Norman in the second half on mutual aid efforts here in New York City. Our headlines are normally brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by New York City DSA Electoral Working Group covering local politics and radical activism. You can subscribe at thethorn.nyc. Our first guest today will be Lomita Ahmed from the People for Bernie, Millennials for Bernie. She's also a Queens DSA member and has been doing a lot of mutual aid in her own community in Queens, as well as running for district leader. Lomita, are you on the line yet?
Yes. Hi, Lee.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Well, I'm hanging in there. Well, thank you so much for being back on the show. You were on in December, and obviously a lot has changed since then. And throughout the show, we want to talk about how organizing has shifted with Bernie dropping out of the presidential race and now our city being ravaged by coronavirus. But one thing I kind of wanted to check in with you first on is, you were somebody who put an immense amount of time and energy into both Bernie campaigns. Can you talk a little bit how you were feeling when he dropped out of the presidential race?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt really depressed and sad like everyone else, and very hopeless, but at the same time, I knew that this wasn't the end, and we have to keep going, and there are going to be really important decisions that we have to make in the next couple of months. Right now, I'm fighting to make sure that I can be a delegate at the DNC so that we can still represent our values to the Democratic Party and fight for them, even if Bernie isn't isn't the candidate anymore. So I don't know. I'm still kind of processing, to be honest. And I've just been hopeful and keeping myself going because there's just so many people down ballot that represent his values that are running and has the opportunity to win. People like me who are running for district leader on June 20 and will be on the ballot in June 23rd. So I just try to remember that and to stay hopeful.
Yeah, and also, him dropping out came in this moment where we're also now dealing with a global health pandemic, which, has really exposed a lot of the problems with capitalism. So can you talk a little bit about how the coronavirus has impacted your community, some of the mutual aid organizing you've been doing in a response to that, and also how all this organizing and kind of reflects some of the organizing that was done to elect Bernie? How has that shifted to pandemic response organizing?
Yeah, so when I was actually campaigning for myself and Bernie, because he was still on the ballot, around that time we saw that people were really hesitant to sign petitions, etc. And I realized that what we needed to do was immediately shift to mutual aid efforts to help people because people were so busy just struggling to survive this that they didn't even have time to think about democracy. Yet we have a governor who's cutting Medicaid, right, during this crisis and implementing like a very harsh austerity measure that could hurt so many people. So it was still equally important to still be tuned in and vote and pay attention. So as an organizer, it's sometimes hard to do just to do both, to do mutual aid, to do mutual aid work or to separate them, to do policy work when all these people are worried about unemployment and healthcare. So we just decided, hey, this is our opportunity to meet people who are the ones we're talking about, the people at the front lines of this economic crisis, because they're going to be hit hardest, and actually provide them with a service that they could benefit from, which is connections with their neighbors who are able to distribute food to them, able to support them and take care of them. And there's also something beautiful about that. So I switched over immediately because, as Bernie says, right, fight for someone you don't know. And mutual aid is exactly that. It captures the essence of that statement. So it was a no-brainer that as an organizer running for a very local position that I would start doing mutual aid work. And so from there, we realized, especially where I live, which is in the red zone for the COVID-19 crisis, there's a huge population of South Asians, Bangladeshi specifically, and we're a very low-income community and struggling. And many of us are homeless or are cab drivers who have been laid off and haven't been able to acquire unemployment. And many of our community members have died. And we realized that the city hasn't actually done a good job of segregating the data or even reporting our deaths. So not only are we being impacted by this virus, but we literally don't even exist to the city for them to give us resource and say that community really needs help. So while the community groups and CBOs and reporters, ethnic media in the community have counted over 140 deaths alone in the Bangladeshi community, the city officials have put out a number that says 100 South Asians have died. So one, they didn't even desegregate the data to show which among the South Asian, which group, right, are impacted the most. And they also did not they count us properly. So so that's something we've been doing as a mutual aid group, filling the gaps for government their lackadaisical response to this effort. And it's been really exhausting, to be honest. Rewarding, but also very exhausting. And especially in neighborhoods like Jamaica and Jackson Heights, there's always limited volunteer resource available. We have food pantries calling us and asking for volunteers. We have people saying that the government meal services are not, they're ableist. They're not, looking at the most forgotten and marginalized people and working backwards from there. We have people who are like, I can't go get meal assistance because my knees hurt or my back hurts. I can't stand in a line, and even like the food that the government, the New York City food delivery group, I don't know what they're called, but it's delivering to people. You have to have an email address just to apply, which many elderly people don't. And the meals themselves aren't nutritional. And people with like any sort of gastric disease, for example, would not be able to eat it. And then you have, it's not even halal. There's no halal or vegetarian options in certain areas, like my area in Southeast Queens. So these are some of the stuff that we're dealing with. And I just think back to what Bernie says and how important it is right now for us to continue to fight, because if we don't and we give up, like so many people are going to suffer. So we really have to understand that the next phase is us, and the next phase that there was never going to be a savior. It was always going to be us. So in a weird, sobering kind of way, Bernie losing has like strengthened me as a person and made me rely less on like an outsider, right? Or like rely less on a symbol or like a being, and like rely more on myself and my own organizing and working with my community and empowering them.
Yeah, and you're actually running for a local office district leader in Queens. Can you tell us a little bit about that position and maybe how, the involvement in organizing for Bernie led you to run?
Yeah, absolutely. So the district leader position is an unpaid party position. We have 72 of them in Queens, and all of them make up the executive committee of the Democratic Party. They make decisions like nominating people for presidents, for various local offices. And when they nominate someone, then all of their district leaders are tasked with petitioning for that candidate. So it's like an automatic like petitioning force. So it saves them a ton of money. They get access to like that. Those candidates then get access to lawyers from the Democratic Party. That's one of the reasons why Tiffany Caban couldn't survive like the court battle, because they had pro bono, the county had pro bono lawyers, right? So, and they're also not very, currently the county is putting up dead people to run for county committee, and district leaders our current district leaders, not all of them, but some of them are actually putting those people on their ballot to keep others from joining county committee. So there's a lot of like, there's a lack of transparency. Our county is not diverse. It's not reflective of Queens. And that's why, and in my district, there's 4 district leaders. Our district is 36% South Asian, and we have 0 district leaders in my district who are South Asian. So the lack of representation is really, it's stark. So it's important that when we talk about, the Democratic Party's failing us, or like, look at what the Democratic Party's doing to Bernie, and Bernie's even still fighting with them to get like these like changes, like getting rid of super delegates, etc. But he's doing it from the top. So we need to all do it from the bottom. And that means going to like at the heart of the Democratic Party, which are its district leaders and its county committee members. These are super small, unpaid positions that don't require a lot of time. The district leaders meet like, I think they meet like not that many times, maybe once a month or something. And during special, only if there's like a special meeting, and then county committee members meet like twice a year. So, but these are still important positions to occupy because they set the approach of that local party. They set the guidelines for that local party, the principles, etc. It's like joining a club and kind of running. It's kind of like joining DSA in some ways. So, but you're joining the Democratic Party, and they really do need our voices in there to hold them more accountable. Because otherwise, we're always going to have more Bernie Sanders running for office and then losing because the Democratic Party plays its tricks.
Well, thank you so much.
That's why I'm running. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on today, Lomita, and all your organizing. Definitely have you on again sometime to talk more about these local races. So you're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on all your favorite podcast apps. You can connect with us after the show. You can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at anytime at NYCRPM. Today, we're talking about what comes after the Bernie Sanders dropping out of the presidential race and what's happening here on a number of issues in New York City. And now we'll turn it back to Jack Devine.
Thanks, Lee. That was a great interview with Lomita. And now we are joined by Khalil Sukar, who used to work at Amazon and was involved in organizing there. He's no longer in that position, but he still has the relationships and the connections to the workers in the warehouses, and he's involved in this organizing going on. So we really wanted to share his perspective. Khalil, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us on Revolutions Per Minute. I just wanted to ask you, how do recent developments, and particularly Bernie's loss and the rise in worker actions in non-unionized workplaces, reveal the importance of organizing the unorganized?
Yeah, I would believe, I think that it's very revealing of the importance of organized and unorganized, especially because as we have seen in electoral efforts, as they have been able to capture a lot of energy around particular progressive demands, and have had various degrees of success. There hasn't been able to keep the lasting organization necessary to really continue to advance our movements. And in particular with the organized and unorganized, you are engaging in a sphere struggle that is deeply urgent when you have 90% or more workers who are in non-unionized workplaces, all the while large corporations like Amazon have been able to consolidate profit and control the market, all the while continuing to exploit their workers. And so I think that especially the movement of Amazonians United is really very much a model for the potential in revitalizing the labor movement that is in a model of organized and unorganized, because it exemplifies rank and file democracy on the shop floor, and really centering an ethos of solidarity, that we are keeping each other's backs, we keep us safe, and we have to organize with each other in order to get the rights and dignity at work that we deserve, and so I think it very much displays. I think it's unfortunate, the way the end of the Bernie campaign definitely came about, but I do think that a lot of that energy need not, dissipate. And I definitely think, thinking about how we have, a growing labor movement that could, advance, the socialist left. I think relating to, worker organizers like the folks at Amazonians United in particular, but, workers organizing, other places, I think is really necessary in this moment. I think that, while folks have been organizing, in unionized shops, I think it's important that, we think about in this COVID-19 crisis as, these non-unionized workplaces have had a high level of working class activity on the shop floor. Shows that, like, this is something the left needs to relate to. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that I think you hit on a number of crucial points. I mean, the first is being that the fact is that only 10% of the workforce is organized, and the working class is only a potential while it is unorganized. It needs to be brought into certain forms of organization. That doesn't mean it has to be the traditional unionization model. In fact, sometimes the most effective worker organizations are kind of built in moments of creativity for the working class. We can think back to the Civil War, the before unorganized slaves organizing and striking back at the slaveocracy, or the CIO workers in the 1930s pushing forward and being the force that creates the worker-friendly aspects of the New Deal. So it's so encouraging to see, as happening now, that we have hundreds of Amazon workers this week are planning on going on strike, and I believe it's already happening. So we have to, this is unfortunately has to be a brief conversation. We have to jump to a couple of other guests. But before we let you go, how can our listeners kind of show their solidarity with Amazonians United and the workers who are fighting back on the front lines against capital right now?
I think I would deeply suggest, signing if you're a Prime member, what have you. No Prime members, definitely signing on to Prime Member Solidarity petition that's out. I believe it's a Medium post on that, where you promote, like, the existing demands that Amazon workers have had around COVID-19, hazard pay, among other things. Also, if you've lost your job in the midst of this pandemic, I would definitely, get a job at Amazon, get connected to workers organizing in this movement. Absolutely. I think that's one thing that I see, very clearly, is that, if we want to build the left, especially a socialist left, we have to be where workers are organizing. Even if those have been places that, we have dismissed in the past because they aren't unionized, or even we had impulses to convert that energy or independence into a more traditional union campaign. I think it's very important to figure out what are the ways the left can support and engage with this movement, all while maintaining its own, independence and energy and development.
Thank you so much, Khalil, and I really want to get you back on the show to talk more about organizing the unorganized and dive in kind of to the conception of also colonized workers. I think is really critical to understanding this framework. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us. And now we're going to jump to Ben Mabee and Justin Charles, who are with us on Revolutions Per Minute to talk about getting organized for the political revolution. Ben and Justin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. What's good, Jack?
What's good, Ben? How's it going? Justin, you can hear me too?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing, Jack?
Good. How are you doing, Justin?
Hanging in there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for both of you for joining us on Revolutions Per Minute. And I just wanted to ask you both about the resolution that was passed by NYC DSA, getting organized for the political revolution. It was developed when it seemed like Bernie had a real chance of winning, but it also might be more important now than ever since he will not be the nominee. So can you explain what that resolution was and its purpose? And in what ways did Bernie's inability to win the Democratic primary demonstrate the need to develop more powerful working class institutions? Ben, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. As you said, we wrote this resolution in January, and while we wanted to prepare for a number of diverse political scenarios that might unfold, we were really kind of hoping that this would be a conference about taking advantage of the organizing opportunities opened up by Bernie's successful race for the White House. Hopefully a successful race that would take him all the way to the DNC, if not 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We saw that he was gaining in speed and momentum, and as we led up to some of the first primaries and caucuses that were going to happen in February, and a number of different movement organizations and unions like the Dream Defenders, like the Sunrise Movement, like United Electric and teachers unions that had just been striking the year prior, were increasingly backing his candidacy and his vision for social transformation. And we thought, if we want to get prepared for the opportunities that are going to be opened up and the kind of fights that are going to be ahead if he were to arrive in the White House, then we need to be organized and we need to be coordinated across a diverse number of movement organizations. But of course, the conference is still important. We have a kind of political situation where Bernie's campaign produced a really high level of political and programmatic unity amongst a diverse number of organizers and activists that have rallied around shared demands, a shared way of doing politics, and a kind of shared kind of intransigence against kind of, the exploitation and domination that defines American politics writ large. And we need to kind of consolidate that and take advantage of those kind of new alliances that were opened up by the Bernie campaign and build on them, thinking about how we can retool the political revolution for the fights to kind of come, whether that's about COVID, whether that's about the oncoming economic recession, or just about politics as usual in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so crucial to bring the forces that were aligned in the Bernie campaign together to think about the changing circumstances and the kind of new phase of struggle that we've entered into, and also to reassess our limitations and the failures that we've had. I think there's obviously been power built in the socialist left over the past decade, but I think it's also clear that it's not nearly enough to get us where we want to go. So, Justin, I'll throw the next question to you. How did Bernie's inability to win in 2020 kind of reveal the weakness of working class institutions as they're currently constituted and the need to develop a more powerful, organized working class?
I think we always knew it was going to be tough for Bernie to succeed in this election. And I think, if we didn't believe that the Democratic establishment would rally behind somebody sooner or later, we were fooling ourselves. I think this really demonstrates, we need several things. We need more of a presence in the mass media for the left. Mm-hmm. Shows like this being a really great start. We need to build working class institutions, and across those organizations that Ben mentioned, there's a variety of struggles that are not going to go anywhere, and they're probably going to be exacerbated by COVID-19. These struggles are going to need to be foregrounded, and we're going to need to organize in a much more, I think, thorough, sustained way. I think, we're finding that, it's not going to be enough to rally our forces every 4 years. When the challenger comes, it'll be somebody other than Bernie in 4 years, in 8 strikes, like we've seen what's going on now with people, unable to get PPE. We're going to have to keep building as a class to be able to try and build the kind of movement that can actually win for working people. But it's tough because I think what's demonstrated in some of the exit polling, for example, that happened with the Bernie Sanders primary races, the ones that actually we're seeing through, is people support this agenda. People support the policy positions that Bernie was putting forward. They just don't believe that it's possible. I think the work of us and people who want to work in this committee and the organizations that got behind Bernie, the unions, et cetera, is doing the work amongst our communities, amongst the people in our lives to actually, broaden their political imaginations a bit more, to make people believe that it is possible to have this better society that we envision. That's going to be a long, hard fight, but we don't do it. I don't know what else we're going to be able. I don't know what we're going to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, we can't wait and just throw our hopes into another electoral campaign that is far off in years. It has to be a struggle that is constantly happening and building power. And it's also clear that we don't have enough power, or the socialist movement doesn't have enough power to win in the electoral sphere anyway at this moment. So even if that's your kind of limited horizon, it's clear and necessary to be building power in all of these different spheres of struggle. I want to thank you both so much for joining us on Revolutions Per Minute, and I really want to explore getting organized for the political revolution as it comes to fruition. But Ben, there's a link that you wanted to share with our listeners that they can sign up to become part of the organizing committee if they're interested.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be trying to tap DSA members as well as members of other movement organizations a lot over the coming months to help make this conference happen. But if you're in particular a DSA member that wants to get involved, please check out this link. It's bit.ly/political revolution, bit.ly/political revolution. And please, throw your hat in the ring, say you want to get involved. And hopefully do so before this Sunday. It's only going to happen because of the organizing work we all put in.
That is a perfect way to put it. And nothing is going to happen without the organizing work that we all put in. So thank you again to both of you for joining us in Revolutions Per Minute. And I'm going to throw it to Lee to introduce our next segment.
Yeah, as Justin mentioned, Bernie had a very popular agenda, and one of the most popular positions was Medicare for all. So up next, and that's even more important now, healthcare. So we'll be turning to Amy Wilson's interview with returning guest Emma Claire Foley from the Organizing Committee of New York City's DSA Medicare for All Working Group.
Hey, what's up, New York City? This is Amy Wilson for Revolutions Per Minute. Today I'm with my comrade Emma Claire Foley of South Brooklyn DSA and the organizing committee of our citywide healthcare working group. Emma Claire has been with us on the show before discussing organizing for universal healthcare. So today we're going to hear a brief update from her on what's going on in that struggle right now, what we can expect to happen over the next 6 to 12 months, and of course, how you can get involved. So hello, welcome, Emma Claire.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm also okay with a rueful tone in my voice as I say it. I think we're on the same page here.
Yeah, let's move on. So tell me a little bit about the healthcare working group, how you are organizing now under these new public health restrictions, and what is going on with your work now that we're at the end of the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Totally, yeah. Well, I think the healthcare working group, along with other working groups in NYC DSA, along with anyone who's organizing right now, has been spending the past few weeks, trying to develop new ways to organize while we're all, under quarantine, social distancing, and a lot of that involves kind of expanding things we were already doing, and a lot of it's new, and we're all kind of learning from each other. And it's interesting because it's not just really about method, right? It's also about like things are changing so quickly, like with this massive health crisis we're in, with the presidential campaign, and it's all keep trying to keep up with that, trying to craft like a response that makes sense, a goal that makes sense, has been a lot of our work. Mm-hmm. We're like the sort of the upshot of it is what we're working on right now is organizing as part of the national campaign to help get what's a new bill passed to deal with the crisis of healthcare that we're seeing unroll, like during the COVID-19 crisis. It's called the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act, introduced by Bernie Sanders in the House and Pramila Jayapal, Bernie Sanders in the Senate, come on, and Pramila Jayapal in the House, just like Medicare for All. And basically what it would do is it would pay for all healthcare during the COVID-19 crisis, not just COVID-19 related care, which has been proposed, and different insurance companies have said they'd implement it. The federal government said it would implement it at different times. Of course, this is all just kind of like a massive, deadly clown car of a response. So who knows what's happening? But what if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, if you're sort of immersed in the crisis of healthcare in the U.S. in general, what you realize is that paying for the treating one condition in a country where the lack of affordable healthcare leads to about 70,000 deaths a year, leads to chronic conditions. People who live in the United States are unhealthy, and if you get someone with a chronic condition who comes in for treatment for COVID-19 and they say, well, we'll pay for the COVID-19 treatment, but not your insulin, not your treating your heart condition or anything like that, what that does is create massive debt for that person, and it discourages them from coming in for treatment, which affects everybody. What we're seeing now is what we always knew, that one person's health is everyone's health, and
Right.
We need an adequate response to that.
Right. Well, not to mention that it's just sheerly morally wrong to treat somebody for quote unquote COVID-19, but not for diabetes or kidney failure or whatever else it might be. That's just not how the human body works.
Yeah.
Right. So it's ludicrous that the healthcare system would be designed in that way. So this is a federal level legislation that our New York City working group is working hand in hand with our national working group to support. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. And can you say the name of it one more time?
Yes, it's the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act.
Great. Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds to me like it's sort of the of the moment struggle. Do you anticipate that continuing over the next 6 to 12 months, or what do you see happening in our near future?
Well, that's a great question. One that I would definitely like answered.
Right.
As you know, things are changing day to day, hour to hour, and kind of the whole world is speculating about where we'll be in 6 months, let alone 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. This is, as it says in the name, an emergency measure, but in certain ways it does kind of have the same strategic benefit that something like Medicare for All would. It is a universal social program, even if it's a temporary universal social program. And if you look at any other program like that in the US, they're all incredibly popular, right? And would be incredibly difficult to repeal no matter what anybody says. So this, as kind of like a part of the long-term struggle to win a universal healthcare system for the United States, is, it's part of that struggle. But I think in terms of, more general trends, what will happen optimistically is that you see you saw during the primaries, the early primaries, like all these exit polls showing that like a majority of voters were in support of a single payer system. And that I think is only growing, as this crisis continues. And as the abdication of responsibility on the part of, of the administration and also, the candidate we're left with, becomes clear in the realm of healthcare, I think you will see, and you are seeing, support for this really build.
Right. So what I want to hear you say, and you can tell me if it's not a realistic thing to want, but what I want to hear you say is that the fight for Medicare for all is not over.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. That was like line 1 on my notes. So rough.
Okay, great. Wow. Okay. All right. So just say more briefly, if you can, about, about that. I think a lot of people, that was one of the biggest hopes that Bernie Sanders was carrying along with his campaign, was the promise of a fight for Medicare for all. So say more about how your working group is responding to this change that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that I think people involved in this organizing knew that it was never only about Bernie, right? Like, Bernie's been an incredible advocate for Medicare for all on the national stage. He's done so much to, put it in front of people and really show them why it makes sense, why it would help them, it would build power, and it would be kind of just like a key policy, not only from, making sure people have healthcare, but also from an organizing perspective. But saying that this is a longer game. We're working, and we have been working to slowly build power, build connections that will allow us to push for and ultimately win Medicare for all. So while this time is, we've had some disappointments, it's things are unsure. The goal remains the same, and we'll be here and we'll be fighting for it. So
absolutely. Well, that makes me so happy to hear you say that. It is a source of hope, to remember that folks are still out there fighting hard every single day for all the same policies and programs and changes to society and things that we're looking for with our social movement. So please tell our Revolutions Per Minute listeners how they can get involved with what you're doing.
Yeah, the best way to get involved, since today is Tuesday, tomorrow, Wednesday, April 22nd, from 7 to 9 p.m., the Healthcare Working Group will be having its monthly meeting where we'll be talking through the strategy around this bill that I've been talking about and next steps. And we want all hands on deck. So if you are interested in getting involved in this fight, I want to see you there. The way you can get the information for the call, you have to RSVP to get the Zoom link. This is how we do things now, is you can go to bit.ly/healthcare beyond Bernie. That's all one word. So I'll say that again, bit.ly/healthcare beyond Bernie.
And is that all lowercase as well, Emma Claire?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. And we'll make sure we throw that in the episode description as well, so folks can RSVP for the call, which, as you say, is tomorrow, Wednesday, and that will give them more information about how to plug in with the struggle for universal health care in the United States. Thank you so much, Emma Claire Foley of our Healthcare Working Group, for speaking with me today. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, I just, together we can win. So.
Yep. Solidarity forever.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Amy Wilson, for that great interview. And I just want to remind our listeners that you are tuning in to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Connect with us after the show. You can email us at revolutionsnyc@gmail.com, or you can find us on our website, revolutionsperminute.simplecast.com, or on Twitter at NYCRPM. Today, we've been kind of having a popcorn show where we touch upon a lot of the different efforts that are happening in the coronavirus post-Bernie environment. We're wondering what is to be done with the struggles ahead for socialism. We're hoping to be joined by Simone Norman right now. Simone, are you live on the air?
Not yet.
Not yet. So maybe let's first let's jump to Lee, and she can introduce the next clip that we have.
Bernie Sanders was clearly the candidate for many climate organizers with his call to ban fracking and support a Green New Deal. But with Bernie out of the race, I spoke with Jen from the Eco-Socialist Working Group on about how New York City DSA is continuing to fight for energy democracy post-Bernie, and in a city where folks are now struggling to pay their utility bills. Here's Jen.
My name is Jen Jantanapi-Shie, and I'm a member of the New York City DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group.
And so, Jen, as a member of the New York City Eco-Socialist Working Group, what parts of Bernie's platform, were you most excited about seeing happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have been a huge Bernie supporter since 2016 when he first ran, and personally I was behind a lot of his platforms, but I think most critically for me, it was that he was the only candidate that really understood the critical need to tackle climate change and its root causes. And as an eco-socialist, I really feel that he understood that we needed to break up big banks and stop what a lot of people call the money pipeline. So all of the banks that are funding fossil fuel infrastructure and our country's dependency on fossil fuels, we really need to end fossil fuel finance. As we all know, as eco-socialists, Wall Street is financing climate destruction, and I think we saw oil prices drop yesterday below zero. So I think that with that, some banks are looking to take over these pipeline projects. And if we kind of break up these banks and stop fossil fuel finance, I think that was something that Bernie really understood and was ready to fight for.
And, now that Bernie is out of the race for president, how is the New York City DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group kind of fighting to get those goals still accomplished, on a local level? I know there's the public power campaign, and that has kind of shifted a little bit into things like utility strikes. Can you talk about the organizing that's happening there?
Yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment to kind of adjust and shift our organizing online. But we had a public power town hall at the end of March, right when we were all starting to settle into quarantine. We recently started partnering campaign-wise with the Housing Justice for All campaign. So they're calling for a rent strike, and we really see utilities as being tied in with housing, because with housing, you also need to power your home with electricity and heat and gas. And if people are struggling to pay their rent, they are most certainly struggling to also pay for utilities. So we are trying to join efforts and kind of really help people get behind both of these. And I think the virus has really exposed the need for public power in so many ways. And we're realizing how capitalism is really failing us, especially, mega rich corporations like National Grid, who are still trying to build pipelines in North Brooklyn and who are still profiting aggressively. And yet they're controlling our energy during pandemic. And when shut-off moratoriums are over, we don't want corporations like this having control over our energy and being able to shut off power for those who are really vulnerable.
And what's some of the best ways for people to get involved in that local organizing?
Well, we have an eco-socialist meeting actually tonight at 7. And then we recently launched the Public Power Hour, which is a bi-weekly episode, a series where we interview and talk with folks who, are fighting for the Green New Deal or fighting for various issues that are related to what we're fighting for. So our next episode is this Sunday, April 26th, and our theme for that episode will be the rent and utility strike, where we'll be talking with Sia Weaver, who represents the Housing Justice for All Coalition Sumithi, who's an organizer, and Marcella. And then there's also the campaign link for that is bit.ly/can'tpaymay. You can visit the Public Power website, which is publicpower.nyc, to learn about the different principles of the Public Power campaign, which are decarbonize, decolonize, democratize, and decommodify. And there should be some various links on that website on how to plug in and get involved.
So in the last couple minutes of our show today, we are joined by Simone Norman, who is a multi-returning guest and our typical headlines reader, who can give our listeners a brief update on mutual aid efforts happening here in New York City and how they can get involved. Simone, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah.
So just we have to get off the air in a couple minutes, but can you just please give like a brief update what's happening with mutual aid efforts here in New York and how our listeners can plug into them?
Sure, and also sorry I didn't do the headlines today. I was out making mutual aid grocery deliveries, but I know that sounds like a convenient excuse, but
that's much more important. Don't worry about it. We're running low on time anyway, so we probably didn't need them.
Great. Okay, cool. So basically, please, everyone who is interested in getting involved with mutual aid, which is a direct resource and goods transfer between neighbors during this time of pandemic, please go to mutualaid.nyc. It's a citywide directory of local, sometimes even hyper-local, like as local as a block or a building, local mutual aid hubs that you can join as a volunteer, or if you're in need of assistance, you can request aid directly. There's a comprehensive citywide map where folks can look up what's going on in their borough and then even in their neighborhood. So New York City DSA has partnered with Mutual Aid NYC. It's a group of organizers from Reclaim Pride, Occupy Sandy, Jay Fredge, Carrying Majority, etc. DSA members are among some of the founding launchers of that site, myself included, although I've now retreated into my local pod. So this is a great place for anyone who's interested in making mutual aid a part of their days, or even to whatever degree you can, small part or large part. It's a great place for you to plug in locally, and the more local, the better, because in times of extreme alienation and isolation right now during the coronavirus epidemic, capitalism seeks to alienate us, so coronavirus really, really seeks to alienate us, keep us trapped inside. It's really hard to serve your neighbors, but Mutual Aid NYC and just the spirit of a horizontal mutual aid operation is the only thing that can keep our neighborhoods above water as the state fails to meet our needs. So that is
sorry, I don't want to cut you off. You got a final comment to wrap it up?
That is it. That's me wrapping it up. Please lend a hand, $1 or a trip to the grocery store, or even just connecting the dots for folks in need is a big help right now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Simone. And I think you're absolutely right in the need to show solidarity with your neighbors in this time and do whatever you can while people are dealing with this catastrophe. And I just want to thank all of our guests for joining us here on Revolutions Per Minute. Lee, any final comments before we wrap it up?
I'm just super impressed with all of the organizing that's still happening despite, the really horrible conditions that we're all under, and just it's great.
Absolutely. I think it's encouraging to see people still fighting back, and maybe fighting back with more power than we've seen in decades from workers and organizers all across the city and the country. So I just want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank Reggie for being an essential worker and keeping the radio station running while we are out of the studio. I want to shout out all the workers out there who are keeping our society functioning. Thank you for joining us on Revolutions Per Minute. I'm Jack Devine, and you'll hear from us next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m.
again.